The basic right to eat is at the very heart of Haiti's struggle for democracy. Those who have food and those who don't marks the vast chasm separating Haiti's wealthy elite from millions of impoverished citizens. The rich of my country, a tiny percentage of our population, sit at a vast table covered in white damask overflowing with good food, while the rest of my countrymen and countrywomen are crowded under the table, hunched over in the dirt and starving. Haiti's hunger crisis is no accident. It is the direct result of U.S. economic policies imposed on rural Haiti beginning in the 1980s. The story of how the U.S. undermined Haiti's domestic rice industry explains why a nation of farmers can no longer feed itself. Those are the words of Haiti's first democratically elected president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. He was a champion for social and economic rights of Haiti's poor and fought against the decades-long destruction of Haiti's agricultural economy by the hands of U.S. politics. Unfortunately, he lost that fight. So, in this video, I'll take a look at the history of rice and U.S. politics in Haiti to illustrate how the dismantling of Haiti's agricultural economy set the stage for many lives to be lost in the 2010 earthquake. The story of Haitian rice begins in Africa, where it has sustained African peoples for centuries. It became a basic staple of Haitian diet after the forced migration of African slaves to the island of Hispaniola. Rice has been cultivated in Haiti since its 1804 independence. Up until the 1980s, Haitian farmers produced most of the rice consumed in Haiti. Rice production fed the country while boosting its agricultural economy. Protected tariffs of around 150% made this possible by stopping foreign rice from flooding the Haitian market. Unfortunately, this protection gradually wore off under the US-backed dictator Jean-Claude Duvalier and the brutal military regimes that followed. The dismantling of Haiti's agricultural economy started with Ronald Reagan's 1984 Caribbean Basin Initiative, which promoted a major increase in US food aid to Haiti. Reagan wanted to maintain US influence in the Caribbean while destroying Cuba's. As a result, he gave Duvalier money through US food aid to gain his support for the plan to restructure Haiti's economy by integrating it into the global market through redirecting 30% of Haiti's domestic food production to exports. To make things worse, the United States fully recognized that this plan would lead to widespread hunger in rural Haiti, as farmers' land will be converted to grow food for foreigners. But they continue anyways, foolishly believing that food aid will eventually compensate rural Haitians for this attack on their livelihood. Eventually, food aid brought cheaper American rice into the Haitian market, and it outsold the more expensive Haitian rice, wrecking local economies while benefiting big American companies who grew and transport American rice. Moving on, in 1986, a popular uprising forced Jean-Claude Duvalier out of power, leaving a power vacuum which a military committee headed by General Henri Namfi filled in. Predictably, instead of abandoning their plans, the United States aligned with the military committee and intensified measures to restructure Haiti's economy. So, in 1987, Namfi received International Monetary Fund loans valued at $24.6 million in exchange for agreeing to slash Haiti's rice tariffs from 150% to 50%, opening all of Haiti's ports to commercial activity and stopping what little support the government had for Haitian farmers. These measures sealed the fate of Haitian farmers. They didn't stand a chance against this unfair competition. They lost their businesses as domestic rice cultivation plummeted and were forced to move from the countryside to the cities to look for employment. Eventually, hope came for these farmers in 1990 when Jean-Bertrand Aristide was elected president in Haiti's first democratic election. The Aristide government met with a large coalition of farmers associations and unions and proposed buying all Haitian-grown rice in order to stabilize the price and limit rice imports during periods between harvests. Unfortunately, this new hope didn't last long. Just 7 months after his inauguration, President Aristide and the democratic government were overthrown in a bloody military coup led by CIA-funded General Raul Cedras. Cedras then proceeded to savagely torture, imprison, and massacre activists and supporters of the constitutional government. Few countries legitimized the Cedras regime because of its human rights abuses. But this did not stop American Rice Inc. from collaborating with the ruthless military regime. In the following year, they negotiated a 9-year contract with the illegal Haitian government and began to import American rice under its newly formed Rice Corporation of Haiti to turn a profit. Not to mention, Bill Clinton's 1992 election took place during Haiti's repressive Cedras regime while President Aristide lived in exile in the United States. Eventually, Clinton became a mediator between the coup leaders and President Aristide to negotiate the return of Haiti's democratically elected government. Bill took advantage of this role. He used the threat of continued repression as a bargaining chip. While he stalled, demanding more and more economic concessions from Aristide, the U.S. continued supporting the Cedros regime, who were continually murdering supporters of the constitutional government. Unfortunately, by the time President Aristide returned to Haiti, the long and deliberate U.S. campaign waged against Haiti's agricultural economy was complete. Imported American rice was 80% of Haiti's domestic consumption, while their domestic agriculture became unstable. I love doing videos on Haiti because I get to show the truth while destroying the lies about my country. Today, we learn how Haiti's strong rice economy was destroyed by American foreign economic practices. They flooded Haiti's market with cheap American rice, making it harder and harder for Haitian farmers to compete with their more expensive Haitian rice, causing them to lose their livelihoods. And I didn't even mention how American politics destroyed the peanut and sugar production in Haiti. Anyways, these practices had devastating side effects. With domestic rice production plummeting, some farmers were no longer able to feed their families and were forced to move to the capital city of Port-au-Prince in search of employment. The population of the city ballooned out of control into the millions with these new arrivals. And this was terrible because Port-au-Prince was built during colonial times to house only a few hundred thousands, not millions. And this set the stage for the devastating 2010 earthquake to kill around 220,000 people while leaving thousands homeless and hungry and forcing many to take dangerous routes out the country looking for better opportunities. So next time you hear something about Haiti in the news, saying how terrible it is, ask yourself this question: what led the country to be in that position? And the deeper and deeper you look, you'll understand that most of it is foreign policies.